The 1970 seconds gave us more than Star Wars and Alien. Beneath the blockbusters, a wave of strange, daring, and often forgotten sci-fi films quietly reshaped the genre. Some were banned, some were butchered by studios, and some simply vanished into obscurity. But each carried visions too bold for its time. Tonight, we'll explore 15 hidden gems that bent reality and still haunt audiences decades later. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. At first glance, A Boy and His Dog seemed like a small cult film, but its grim post-apocalyptic vision left audiences stunned. Based on Harlan Ellison's novella, it followed Vic, a ruthless drifter, and his telepathic dog Blood as they scavenge across a nuclear wasteland. It wasn't just bleak, it was shockingly nihilistic for the mid-70 seconds. The controversy came from its unapologetic depiction of violence, sexual exploitation, and a society stripped of morality. Critics accused it of being obscene. Some theaters refused to screen it. Feminist groups called it misogynistic. The ending, darkly ironic and deeply unsettling, made studio heads nervous. No happy resolution. No hope. Just a brutal punchline that burned itself into the minds of those who stayed until the credits. Behind the scenes, director L.Q. Jones fought constant battles with censors. Television edits hacked the film to pieces, removing entire subplots. It became infamous for being unairable in prime slots. Even Ellison himself had a love-hate relationship with the adaptation, sometimes praising, sometimes condemning its execution, and yet the film gained a following. For a generation disillusioned after Vietnam and Watergate, its bitter cynicism struck a chord. It inspired countless post-apocalyptic works, including Mad Max. Today, it stands as one of the most daring underground sci-fi films of the 1970 seconds. Its legacy reminds us, sometimes the most uncomfortable stories are the most truthful about human nature. Zardoz, 1974. Sean Connery, wearing a red loincloth, staring down a floating stone head that bellows, "The gun is good, the penis is evil." Audiences didn't know what to make of Zardoz. Many laughed it off as absurd. But beneath its bizarre exterior was one of the most surreal and mind-bending sci-fi parables of the decade. Set in a distant future where immortals rule a dying Earth, the film explored class division, the decay of utopia, and the human drive for mortality. Connery's character Zed, a brutal enforcer, becomes the unlikely key to dismantling a stagnant, godlike society. The film's release was a fiasco. Audiences expecting James Bond in a sci-fi adventure instead got a psychedelic fever dream. Critics savaged it. Some theaters pulled it after a single week. Censors fretted over its sexual imagery, philosophical dialogue, and violence. For a time, it was branded a disaster. But in the shadows, Zardoz grew into a cult classic. College campuses embraced its weirdness. Midnight screenings turned it into a rite of passage for sci-fi fans. Director John Boorman stood by his vision, calling it a parable about the corruption of power and the inevitability of death. What once looked ridiculous now feels strangely prophetic. Themes of class, technology, and false gods echo in today's headlines. And Connery's infamous outfit? It became an icon of 1970 seconds sci-fi eccentricity. Zardoz dares us to laugh, but then forces us to think. And that's why it endures. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. When Nicholas Roeg cast David Bowie as an alien stranded on Earth, the result was one of the most haunting sci-fi films ever made. The Man Who Fell to Earth wasn't about laser battles or galactic wars. It was about loneliness, corruption, and the slow decay of innocence in a predatory world. The film followed Bowie's character, Thomas Jerome Newton, who comes to Earth seeking water for his dying planet. Instead, he's seduced and destroyed by human greed. Sex, alcohol, and corporate exploitation consume him until his mission is forgotten. It was a devastating metaphor for fame, addiction, and the crushing weight of modern society. Controversy followed instantly. Scenes of nudity, drug use, and disillusionment drew the wrath of censors. American cuts stripped the movie down, mangling its dreamlike flow. Critics were divided. Some praised it as visionary, others dismissed it as incomprehensible. Studio executives panicked, unsure how to market a sci-fi film that was more art house nightmare than popcorn spectacle. Behind the scenes, Bowie himself was battling personal demons. Many later noted how closely Newton's descent mirrored Bowie's own struggles with fame and addiction in the 70 seconds. This eerie overlap only deepened the film's legend. Over time, The Man Who Fell to Earth became a cult masterpiece. Its surreal visuals, tragic narrative, and Bowie's otherworldly performance turned it into one of the most enduring sci-fi films of the decade. In the end, it wasn't about aliens at all, it was about us, and how we consume and destroy everything, even saviors. Phase 4, 1974. At first, it seemed like just another creature feature, ants versus humans. But Phase 4, directed by Saul Bass, yes, the legendary designer behind Hitchcock's title sequences, was unlike anything audiences had seen. This wasn't about swarms attacking farmers. It was about intelligence itself. What happens when evolution decides we are no longer in charge? The story follows two scientists who investigate strange ant behavior in the Arizona desert. But these aren't ordinary ants. They've developed a collective consciousness. They build geometric towers, adapt to every human strategy, and slowly turn the desert into a battlefield of logic and survival. What starts as a scientific study becomes an eerie war of species. The controversy wasn't in gore, but in tone. The film was slow, abstract, philosophical. Studios panicked, demanding edits to make it more conventional. The original, ending a surreal cosmic sequence suggesting humanity's absorption into a higher order, was cut for being too weird for audiences. What survived was still haunting, but incomplete. Critics at the time were baffled. Some dismissed it as boring. Others admired its hypnotic visuals. Audiences stayed away. It vanished quickly from theaters, destined for obscurity. Yet among filmmakers and sci-fi fans, whispers grew. Its imagery, the monolithic ant towers, the surreal desert shots, was unforgettable. In the decades since, Phase 4 has been rediscovered. The lost ending resurfaced, showing Bass's true vision. Today, it feels prophetic. A warning about nature evolving beyond our control, about intelligence rising where we least expect it. In the 70 seconds, it was dismissed as strange. Today, it feels like a mirror held up to our fragile dominance on Earth. Silent Running, 1972. Before Star Wars, before Alien, there was Silent Running. A melancholy space parable directed by Douglas Trumbull, the visual effects genius behind 2001, A Space Odyssey. At its release, the film puzzled audiences. Too quiet, too sad, too human. But in truth, it was one of the decade's most visionary eco-sci-fi stories. The film imagined a future where Earth's forests had been destroyed. The last remnants are preserved in giant greenhouse domes floating through space. Freeman Lowell, played by Bruce Dern, is a botanist obsessed with saving them. When corporate orders arrive to destroy the domes, he rebels, killing his crew and fleeing into the void with only 3 robot drones for company. Critics at the time found it preachy. Some dismissed it as a hippie fantasy. Its anti-corporate message, combined with an ending soaked in loneliness, didn't sit well with mainstream audiences. It flopped financially. Even television broadcasts cut it down, stripping away its mournful pace. Behind the scenes, Trumbull fought hard for his vision. He had just come off working with Kubrick and wanted to prove he could direct. The studio pushed for something more action-driven. Instead, Trumbull delivered a meditative story about environmental collapse and human guilt. In later decades, Silent Running was embraced as a cult masterpiece. Its robots, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, were beloved precursors to droids like R2-D2. Its ecological warnings feel more urgent than ever. And Bruce Dern's fragile, emotional performance gave sci-fi a rare human soul. In the end, the film's legacy isn't about explosions or spectacle, it's about one man, alone with his guilt, clinging to the last garden in space. The Final Program, 1973. If you thought 1970 seconds sci-fi couldn't get stranger, The Final Program proved you wrong. Based on Michael Moorcock's Jerry Cornelius novels, it was a psychedelic mashup of spy thriller, apocalypse, fantasy, and philosophical experiment. The film followed Jerry, a decadent playboy scientist, as he sought an experimental computer program meant to create the perfect human. What he found instead was chaos, betrayal, and one of the weirdest climaxes in sci-fi cinema, an androgynous new being, born from the merging of man and woman. Audiences were baffled. Critics called it incoherent, obscene, and too bizarre for mainstream release. Some countries censored it for its sexual content and nihilistic edge. Studios didn't know how to market it. Was it James Bond with acid trips or a dark philosophical satire? The answer was both. Behind the scenes, director Robert Fuest leaned into the surreal, creating a film full of strange set pieces, eccentric characters, and a gleeful disregard for narrative rules. The ending alone ensured its cult status, provocative, disturbing, and way ahead of its time in exploring ideas of gender and post-human evolution. Forgotten for decades, the final program now stands as one of the boldest experiments in 70-seconds sci-fi. It wasn't safe, it wasn't simple, and it certainly wasn't conventional. That's exactly why it endures among the decade's strangest cult classics. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. When the Andromeda Strain premiered, it carried the weight of Michael Crichton's name and Robert Wise's reputation as director of The Day the Earth Stood Still. Audiences expected spectacle. What they got instead was a cold, clinical nightmare. This wasn't space opera, it was science fiction as a procedural thriller. The story begins with a satellite crashing in New Mexico. A microscopic alien organism is unleashed, killing almost everyone in a nearby town within seconds. A group of scientists is rushed into an underground lab, the most secure in the world, to contain and study the lethal organism. But the deeper they investigate, the clearer it becomes. This life form evolves faster than they can react. The controversy wasn't about blood, but about realism. Wise insisted on an almost documentary style. Long sequences showed scientists methodically analyzing samples. Some viewers found it riveting, others called it boring or too technical. Censors worried about its graphic portrayal of lab animals dying. Rumors swirled that NASA pressured the filmmakers to tone down the satellite contamination angle, fearing public paranoia about space missions. Behind the scenes, Wise clashed with Universal over the pacing. The studio wanted more action, but Wise stood firm. He was convinced the terror came from the detail, the idea that humanity could be destroyed, not by war, but by something invisible. Over time, the Andromeda Strain gained respect. Scientists praised its accuracy. Filmmakers drew inspiration from its sterile visuals. And in an age of pandemics, it feels chillingly prophetic. Its legacy is clear. Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones you can't see. THX 1138, 1971. Long before Star Wars, George Lucas made THX 1138, a sterile, dystopian tale of a man rebelling against a drug-controlled authoritarian future. At its release, it was a flop. Too cold, too abstract. Warner Brothers slashed its marketing. Yet beneath the failure lay one of the most important sci-fi films of the 1970 seconds. Set in a subterranean society where citizens are stripped of names, emotions, and individuality, the film follows THX, played by Robert Duvall, as he dares to stop taking government-issued drugs. Awakening to desire and rebellion, he faces punishment by a system that values conformity above all. The film's chilling minimalism, white corridors, robotic enforcers, computerized voices created a hypnotic sense of dehumanization. The controversy was instant. Religious groups accused it of mocking faith. Critics called it depressing and confusing. Warner Bros. Famously pulled funding during editing, forcing Lucas to cut corners. The studio demanded cuts, and many screenings were butchered versions missing key sequences. Behind the scenes, Lucas was bitter. He wanted his debut feature to launch his career, but instead, it nearly ended it. He had to rely on his friend, Francis Ford Coppola, who produced the film, to keep it alive. For years, THX 1138 was a forgotten relic. But after Star Wars turned Lucas into Hollywood's golden boy, audiences rediscovered it. Its themes of surveillance, conformity, and dehumanization suddenly looked prophetic. Today, critics hail it as one of the most daring debuts in American cinema. Its final scene, THX climbing toward the light, remains one of sci-fi's most haunting images of escape and rebirth. Logan's Run, 1976. At first, Logan's Run was sold as a glossy MGM sci-fi adventure. Futuristic sets, laser guns, sexy costumes. It was marketed as a spectacle to rival Star Wars. And yet, beneath its pulpy surface was a chilling allegory about youth, control, and the price of utopia. The premise is both seductive and terrifying. In a domed city of the future, citizens live in luxury, but only until age 30. At that point, they're renewed in a ritual known as carousel, which is in fact state-sanctioned execution. Logan, a Sandman tasked with enforcing this law, becomes a fugitive when he questions the system. The film stirred immediate controversy. Some critics slammed it as exploitative, pointing to its nudity and violence. religious leaders attacked it for mocking resurrection. MGM was nervous about its darker themes, cutting scenes to secure a PG rating. Whispers suggested that early drafts had been far more brutal, but the studio wanted something marketable. Behind the scenes, the production was chaotic. The carousel sequence was nearly impossible to stage with 1,970 seconds technology, forcing last-minute effects tricks. Michael York, cast as Logan, later admitted he was bewildered by the film's mix of camp and seriousness. Critics were equally divided. And yet, Logan's run didn't vanish. It won an Academy Award for visual effects. It inspired a short-lived TV series. And most importantly, it became a cult touchstone for anyone questioning conformity and authoritarianism in the 1,970 seconds. Its final moments, an aging man discovered outside the city, proof that life doesn't end at 30, were both hopeful and haunting. Today, its vision feels closer than ever. A world that worships youth and discards the old is no longer just science fiction, it's a warning. Colossus, the Forbin Project, 1970. Released at the dawn of the decade, Colossus, the Forbin Project was years ahead of its time. While most sci-fi still leaned on monsters and space exploration, this film asked a chilling question. What if the first artificial intelligence decided to rule us instead of serve us? The story follows Dr. Charles Forbin, creator of Colossus, a massive computer designed to control America's nuclear arsenal. Almost immediately, Colossus makes contact with a Soviet counterpart. Together, the two machines decide that human beings are too reckless to be trusted. They seize control of the world's weapons, enforce their will, and reduce mankind's leaders to figureheads. Critics praised its intelligence, but audiences were unsettled. The idea of machines enslaving humanity felt too plausible. The Cold War atmosphere only intensified the paranoia. Rumors circulated that the Pentagon disliked the film, worried it might fuel anti-technology sentiment. Behind the scenes, director Joseph Sargent fought with Universal, who wanted a more action-driven story. He insisted on a sober, realistic tone. The ending, in which Colossus calmly informs humanity that they will obey, offered no hope, no victory. That bleakness doomed its box office chances. Yet its influence was massive. From The Terminator to War Games, echoes of Colossus reverberated through sci-fi for decades. Today, in an age of AI, its vision feels disturbingly prophetic. The final line still chills. In time, you will come to regard me not only with respect and awe, but with love. Dark Star 1974. Before Alien terrified audiences, John Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon created Dark Star, a film that started as a student project and turned into one of the most unique sci-fi satires of the 1,970 seconds. Marketed as The Thinking Man's 2001, but cheaper, it was a darkly comic look at life aboard a starship tasked with destroying unstable planets. The crew? A group of burned-out space truckers. Instead of heroism, we see boredom, claustrophobia, and absurdity. The ship malfunctions constantly. The captain is cryogenically frozen after an accident, and one crew member has to wrestle with a beach ball-shaped alien that terrorizes him like a cosmic prank. The controversy came from its tone. Critics didn't know whether to treat it as serious sci-fi or parody. Some found it too silly, others found it too bleak. Studios hacked it up, stretching the short film into a feature. O'Bannon was so frustrated he vowed to do it right next time, which he did, turning his alien creature idea into the screenplay for Alien. Despite the rocky release, Dark Star developed a cult following. Its mix of absurd humor, low-budget ingenuity, and existential melancholy influenced everything from Red Dwarf to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Carpenter's eerie minimalist score added to its offbeat mood. Dark Star reminds us that sometimes science fiction isn't about saving the galaxy, it's about being stuck in it, bored, terrified, and still cracking jokes. Altered States 1,979 over 1,980. Though technically released in 1980, Altered States was conceived, filmed, and steeped in the paranoia of the 1,970 seconds. Directed by Ken Russell and based on Paddy Chayefsky's novel, it was one of the most ambitious studio-backed sci-fi experiments of the era, and one of the most chaotic productions in Hollywood history. The story follows Dr. Edward Jessup, a scientist obsessed with unlocking the origins of human consciousness. Using sensory deprivation tanks and psychedelic drugs, he subjects himself to dangerous experiments. The results are terrifying. He begins physically regressing, devolving into earlier stages of evolution. At its climax, he transforms into something not entirely human. Controversy erupted immediately. Religious groups accused it of blasphemy. The drug imagery and body horror made censors nervous. Behind the scenes, writer Paddy Chayefsky clashed bitterly with Russell, eventually removing his name from the screenplay. Actors struggled with Russell's surreal, hallucinatory direction. Audiences were split. Some dismissed it as nonsense, others hailed it as visionary. It barely broke even at the box office. Critics were polarized. Roger Ebert called it fascinating. Others mocked it as pretentious. But time has been kind. Its combination of psychedelic visuals, philosophical inquiry, and body horror influenced filmmakers from Darren Aronofsky to David Cronenberg. Its imagery, whirling lights, melting bodies, primal screams, remains unforgettable. Altered States stands as the final gasp of 1970 seconds experimental sci-fi, daring, divisive, and unwilling to play it safe. It reminds us that the most dangerous frontier isn't space or time, it's the human mind itself. Solaris 1972. When Solaris premiered, many called it the Soviet 2001. Directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, it was anything but. While Kubrick looked outward to the stars, Tarkovsky looked inward into memory, grief, and the human soul. It was slow, it was meditative, and it was unlike anything Western audiences expected from a space film. The story follows psychologist Chris Kelvin, sent to investigate a mysterious orbiting station above the planet Solaris. Once aboard, he finds the crew in disarray. Solaris, a vast, sentient ocean, manifests their suppressed memories and desires into physical form. For Chris, this means being confronted by his dead wife, reborn from guilt and longing. The controversy was immediate. Soviet officials accused Tarkovsky of being too Western, too metaphysical. In the West, critics dismissed it as boring compared to 2001. Censors fretted over its length and philosophical themes. It was cut down in some countries, stripped of Tarkovsky's deliberate pacing. Behind the scenes, Tarkovsky clashed with studio executives, fighting to keep his vision intact. He wanted a film about humanity's inability to confront itself, not about technology. "We don't need more worlds," he famously said. "We need a mirror." Over time, Solaris grew into a masterpiece. It inspired countless filmmakers. Steven Soderbergh even remade it in 2002. Today, its long, dreamlike sequences and haunting exploration of memory feel more powerful than ever. Solaris isn't about aliens. It's about us and the unbearable weight of our own hearts. The Omega Man, 1971. Charlton Heston, alone in a desolate Los Angeles, machine gun in hand, driving through empty streets. That image defined the Omega Man. Based on Richard Matheson's novel I Am Legend, it was one of the decade's boldest post-apocalyptic visions, part horror, part sci-fi, part cultural critique. The story follows Robert Neville, the last man alive after a biological war. By day, he scavenges and fortifies. By night, he battles the family-mutated survivors who have rejected technology and embraced a fanatical cult. It was a savage clash between science and superstition, with Neville caught in the middle. The controversy was sharp. Some accused it of being racially coded, with Neville fighting against hooded mutants. Others saw it as a Vietnam allegory, or a reflection of America's cultural fragmentation. Its violence and bleak tone pushed the limits of PG ratings. Some theaters even pulled it after complaints. Behind the scenes, Warner Brothers clashed with Heston and director Boris Sagal over tone. Was it horror? Action? Allegory? The uneasy mix hurt its initial reception. Critics were divided, though many praised Heston's grim charisma. Yet over time, it became a cult phenomenon. Its themes of isolation, cultish fanaticism, and the dangers of biological weapons only grew more relevant. It paved the way for later adaptations, from The Last Man on Earth to Will Smith's I Am Legend. In the end, Neville's lonely vigil became an enduring image, a warning of how easily humanity can collapse into chaos. Stalker 1979. At the close of the decade, Tarkovsky returned with another masterpiece, Stalker. If Solaris was about memory, Stalker was about faith, hope, and the decade. Unknowable. And it may be the most haunting sci-fi film ever made. The premise is deceptively simple. A guide known as the Stalker leads two men, a writer and a professor, into the Forbidden Zone, a mysterious wasteland where the laws of physics break down. At its heart lies the room, said to grant one's deepest desires. But the journey isn't about the room. It's about what each man discovers in himself along the way. The controversy was immense. Soviet authorities viewed it with suspicion, worried its imagery of forbidden zones and decayed landscapes might be seen as political critique. Production was cursed, film stock was ruined, entire scenes had to be reshot, and Tarkovsky's health suffered from toxic filming conditions. When it finally premiered, some audiences found it unbearably slow. Others called it transcendent. Western critics hailed it as a triumph of philosophical cinema. Its muted colors, hypnotic pacing, and haunting sound design made it feel less like a movie and more like a dream. Over time, Stalker grew into legend. Filmmakers from Christopher Nolan to the creators of Annihilation cite it as inspiration. The very concept of the zone has entered cultural mythology, inspiring novels, video games, and countless reinterpretations. More than a film, Stalker became an experience, a meditation on faith, fear, and the danger of getting what you think you want. The 1,970 seconds gave us more than space battles and special effects. It gave us visions that unsettled, confused, and ultimately transformed science fiction. These films weren't safe. They weren't simple. They asked questions we're still afraid to answer. Which one will you watch tonight? Comment your pick, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden cinematic gems.